This is Outlander, Season 6, Episode 3. Let's get to it. Roger's near the river and hears a baby crying. He looks and sees that it's a basket with a child floating down the river. It's Henry Christian. A group of boys had put him in there as a demon's test. They had heard from their parents that as a dwarf, he was a demon spawn. They would catch fire if they touched him, and he would float in water. To test this theory, the boys had put the basket in water and watched it float down the river. It was nearly over the falls when Roger rescued him. Bringing the baby to the shore, he chastised all the children and found Germain and young Aiden among the group. After learning the reasoning for such a thing, he decided to baptize Henri Christian right there and reminded them that his last name, Christian, meant that he was of God. The young boys ran then, leaving just Germain, Roger, and Henri Christian. Back at the big house, Jamie tells Germain to gather up the boys involved for a punishment, and Roger volunteers to go with him. Fergus, having overheard the entire story being retold, blames himself for the baby's condition because, again, he was responsible in his mind for Marcelly being hurt. Outside, Fergus and Claire speak, and Fergus tells her of the dwarf he knew working in the brothel. He's concerned for his child's future. Later, Tom is waiting for Claire outside the surgery. He's ready for his hand to be fixed. Roger is with Germain. They're at the widow's house to find Aiden, and they hear the widow screaming from inside. Roger dashes in to help her and finds a bullfrog in her milk had given her quite a fright. The widow admits she doesn't like it here on the ridge. It's unfamiliar and lonely. She's having a lot of trouble adjusting to the area. Roger assures her that no matter how difficult things are for her, he will make sure that they never starve. Then we see Marcelly at a spinning wheel, which Brianna has created. It's a more efficient way to spin yarn, and Marcelly is quite impressed because this will save her time and give her more time with her children. The ladies are expecting Jamie and the boys very soon, and Fergus as well, who's promised to stop drinking. In the surgery, Claire is prepared. Christy is tied down and refuses to use ether, so Jamie volunteers to read scripture while administering whiskey. It's difficult for Christy to stay still while Claire tries to reattach his tendons. However, he's able to manage it, and Claire is able to complete the surgery. Outside, Ian and Malva are getting along and discussing their mothers. Malva reveals that her mother was hung as a witch when she was a young child. Back at the big house, Jamie has gathered the boys and gives them each a choice. They can chance catching fire by touching the baby, or they can chance being burned by touching a hot poker he has just pulled from the fire. Each boy chooses to touch Henri Christian, who smiles and giggles, and the boys' fears are quelled with a little logic. Jamie reiterates to the boys that he belongs to God and that the baby also belongs to Jamie. Then he tells Germain that the baby also belongs to him, and as the big brother, he's to protect Henri Christian. At home, Marcelly returns to find her kids are hungry and Fergus again drinking, not caring for the children. She tries to tell him that he's not the only one responsible for their family by admitting that she killed Lionel Brown. But Fergus is more upset than ever. She can't take it anymore and tells him so. She'd watched her mother put up with the drunk and she's not going to do it herself. She throws Fergus out until he can sober up and be a full man once again. Back at home, Claire and Jamie make light of the fact that they are the grandparents of someone who is supposed to be born of evil. But Claire excuses herself and heads downstairs saying she's going to check on Tom. But this is just a ruse. She'd like to use some more ether, as her mind has gone back to Lionel once again. Instead, she sees Tom and sees he needs caring for. Taking care of him takes her mind off her issues, and she takes time to get him something to eat, check on his hand, and then he asks her why she never wears a cap or kerchief. It takes his mind off the pain and her mind off of hers. She also shows him some exercises that he should do to help keep his function as his hand heals. They have a companionable, if not slightly cold, conversation in which Claire admits Adso is not her familiar. She's not a witch. He says he knows she's not a witch, but he does believe in them. He even apologizes. He's upset that he wasn't able to keep as still as he knows Jamie did when Claire had fixed his hand. He then reveals to Claire the story of Jamie taking lashes for the old man in a tartan, showing bravery that Christy does not understand. She ends the talk with Christy, as he hopes that Jamie doesn't see him as one of his men, willing to stand up for him. Claire makes it clear that even though Jamie had stayed and read scripture while she healed his hand, he would have done that for anyone. Claire rejoins Jamie and asks him why it is Tom doesn't care to be touched by women. But Jamie explains that it is a side effect from being in Ardsmuir, where a touch, by man or woman, was simply just rare. Later, Ian and Malva are gathering cattails during a lovely day. This time they're discussing fathers, and Malva's having such high expectations. It's then that Ian says that Jamie would do anything for him. He set aside land for him for when he's able and ready to settle, and the two have a lovely conversation. They're quite sweet together. A week later, Tom's hand is healing well, and Claire and he chat about novels as she tends to his stitches. At first, he had thought novels were a temptation for idleness, and at one point he'd even burned his wife's entire collection. But in Ardsmuir, he had learned a different lesson as Jamie would recount stories that he'd read, and this gave comfort to the men in Ardsmuir and brought them together. So Claire offers to lend him a book, and after some coaxing, Christy takes it with thanks. As he leaves, he tells Claire that Richard Brown came by offering protection. Jamie runs into Malva as she gathers mushrooms for her father. They talk a bit about her family, where she's lived, where she was born, and although she has no memory of Scotland, Jamie assures her that it looks much like where they live now. Back at his camp, Tom is reading the book Claire has loaned him and is shocked by its words. He rereads the same passage in disbelief. At the big house, it's quarter day, tax day, and the gathering has begun at the big house. It includes the settlers paying their taxes and the twins hoping to help Lizzie hand out drink. Fergus is there as well, watching over Jamie and Roger as they collect and mark down each tax. And Bree has an idea to introduce young Lizzie to one of the bachelors who's doing quite well on the ridge, although Roger has to inform her that the twins may have something to say about that. Outside, Fergus is allowing his inebriation to control his words and starts a fight with a rather rude couple disdaining his son. While the family attempt to break up the fight, Fergus's actions don't help. Then Christy is brought up into it, and even he can't defend the rude couple's words about Henry Christian. He reminds them that we're supposed to be kind to those around us. At the church, we find Roger preaching, and he reminds his flock to love thy neighbor before retelling the story of Moses. The boys, watching on, concerned that the story of the baby in a basket would be theirs. They were relieved to hear the story of another baby floating down a river, having been told that all babies like him must be gotten rid of. As he preaches, we see Claire finding her returned book with a note from Christy, stating his disappointment in her choice of novel. We see Christy later lashing Malvo with his healed hand and a belt. Then we see Marcelly spinning as quickly as she can, keeping busy. Fergus in the woods alone, and then Jamie heading out to fish. This is when he spots Fergus and sees that the young man is headed out to hurt himself. Quickly, Jamie catches up with him and after taking the knife away, wraps the wrist that he had slashed to stop the bleeding. Fergus breaks down and tells Jamie that he's useless. And Jamie recounts all of the useless things Fergus has done. He kept the family together when he was away at Ardsmuir. He helped at the print shop when Jamie was still mourning the loss of Claire. And he learned to create an amazing whiskey. He tells Fergus who best to show his son what a useless man can accomplish. Fergus isn't sure he can be that man again, but Jamie assures him he can and takes him home to his wife and his children. Ultimately, Fergus is needed, and we see the family together again. Things look as though they will change for the better. Back at the big house, in our final scene, we see Redcoats riding up. It's Major MacDonald, and he has news. 1, the guns have been delivered. Though it's the fulfillment of Jamie's request, we still see some trepidation on Jamie's face when he is delivered the news and the guns. And the other piece of news, MacDonald shows Claire and Jamie a newspaper. It seems that some tea has been dumped in Boston Harbor. It's begun, Claire declares, and war is coming. And that's my full overview of Outlander Season 6, Episode 3. A couple of things to take note of. I think Jamie handled the boys really well. I mean, he made them look at it logically. Are you really afraid of a baby, or would you be afraid of actual fire? So giving them the choice was a really great way to go about it. I also really enjoy Malva and Ian's interaction. It's sweet. It really is how they're just kind of getting to know each other. And we know now that Ian has a bit of a past because of the time that he spent with the Mohawk. And he's coming back into it still, I think, trying to find that energetic, happy Ian that we met at the very beginning. And it's nice to see Malva having a way to kind of interact with someone her own age as well. And in the end, we're winding up to the war. They've been hinting at the Boston Tea Party for so long. I kind of wondered, are we going to see it? Are we going to see somebody else happen to be in Boston? That it's just delivered by news and that Claire knows what's happening. It's going to be a rough ride from here on, and can't wait to see what happens next. If you like what you've seen and you want to see more content just like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.